Super weird.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this L&D centric presentation on Boise State University's Process Management Lab. Thank you for taking the extra mouse clicks to register and setting aside your time to join us for the session. We're going to be recording this and sending this out along with the presentation deck to the community. And with questions, anybody has any questions, we will monitor those in the chat. You can raise your hands. At the end, we'll have a Q&A session for any last input. And then if you joined recently, instead of a survey, standalone survey, we're going to do some polls at the end to get some immediate feedback for everybody and the presenters. I'll start off by introducing our presenters, our panelists, and then we'll run till about 2:45 to hopefully get you out of here before 3 o'clock. So our presenters are from Boise State's OPWL program, Organizational Performance and Workplace Learning. And it's an MS degree. And Steve is actually a former professor of mine and an esteemed mentor. He's consulted and worked in business, government, nonprofit settings for more than 25 years. And he joined the faculty at Boise State, the engineering college, in 2007 and collaborated with colleagues and clients at the DLS group and created large-scale performance support systems. He also created e-learning, instructor-led training, job aids, and published on those articles. And I'm going to go ahead and put a link to his information in the chat. And also like to welcome Fran Caprai and Osemome Ndebbio, or Ose. Thank you all for joining. Steve, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you for any personal introductions, if you want to introduce the team a little bit more, and then you guys can go ahead and present.
You're on mute.
Certainly. It's my pleasure to be here with my colleagues today. We started the Process Management Lab to help nonprofit organizations improve their internal processes in ways that would help them better meet their missions and serve their communities. And Fran comes to us as a retired chief information officer who's worked with both Albertsons and Amalgamated Sugar. She has a career's worth of experience of how to work organizations and working in those organizations. Ose is one of our OPWL students and works with us in the lab. And I'm fortunate because we get to work together doing things we love for a purpose that we think is worthwhile. And so I get to work with incredible people every day. Chris, back to you.
Okay, back to you, Steve. You want to present your slides? You can take control.
Okay, great.
And I'll start off with a poll, actually. And you can
Okay, I'm
respond
going to
to
let
that
you
while
do the poll first.
Got it. So everyone, you should see a poll coming up in your chat to get a discussion going here. It's populating on my end. Give it a couple minutes. And should be there. So we'd like to know if a potential client comes to L&D with a request for training, what initial thoughts come to mind? And this is a word cloud. Great. So some people are saying help. Audience is something to really consider. What's the true need? Is this the only solution? Or are there other solutions? Technological support? Are there other existing opportunities? What's actually broken? Maybe can we offer another form of performance support? Great. Okay, Steve, did you all want to speak to that?
These are great responses and they lead us right into our presentation. Chris, are we ready to start?
Yep, you can go ahead and take control.
Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Let me try this again. Now can you see my screen?
There we go.
There we go.
Oh, okay, good. So it was just delayed. Thank you for this opportunity to share our work with you. Fran, Ose, and I are with Boise State's Process Management Lab. Rob wasn't able to join us today. We really look forward to our time together. We want to spend our time talking a little bit about those L&D requests for training and some of those first responses that we hear when a client says, I need me some training. I want to tell you a little bit about our process management lab and then spend a little time talking about process management and how it can supplement L&D efforts. And then at the end, talk about some lessons learned and save time for questions and comments towards the end. We're with the Process Management Lab. I told you a little bit about our mission to help nonprofit organizations better serve their community and meet missions by helping them improve their internal processes. We're also forming this lab to help the next generation of performance improvement professionals. Our vision is a world where nonprofits have the infrastructure they need to meet their missions and serve their communities. But let's get back to that opening question. A client calls, they're on the phone. I need me some training, stat. The responses that you provided in that word cloud already indicate that you know the client is saying, I need some training. But there's often a difference between what they're really asking for and why. And I think you can see the problem here. Clients can call almost anything training. They might be asking for an orientation to provide information or to increase awareness. They might be asking you to change people's attitudes or perspectives. It might be something to comply with the regulation. It might be training to close skill gaps. It may be that there's a messy people problem and they think if I just throw some training at it, the problem goes away. So the client calls and says, I need me some training stat. It could be anything, but wait, there's more. Clients also often assume a couple things. They may be assuming that whoever needs the training doesn't want to perform. They might also be assuming that they just don't know how to perform. Both of those assumptions are a little dangerous because they lay the blame on individual performers. And these assumptions give rise to these well-intentioned but often ill-informed requests for training. Training can be useful, but it's not a panacea for whatever ails the client. As your comments in the word cloud indicated, on its own, training may not work well when these other things are happening in the workplace. When standards are broken and no one knows what a good one really looks like, when people need guidance in the form of online or physical job aids, people need feedback about the extent to which their performance meets those standards. Training may not be a panacea when processes are broken, or tools are broken and don't work that well, or abusive. Think of all the user abusive software you've struggled to train people how to use. Training may not work when consequences are wonky. Wonky is a term that they taught me in performance consulting boot camp. It means consequences reward the performance you don't want and punish the performance you do. So training can be powerful. It's not a panacea. It doesn't address these other problems. And so we often need training and other solutions. We want to talk about an approach that can help you identify training and other performance support solutions. And that gets us to the title of our presentation. Whenever possible, fix those broken processes first. Let me give you an example. We're going to tell you about our labs approach while also providing a case study of some of our work with one of our clients, the Idaho Food Bank. Prior to COVID, Idaho was already one of the fastest growing states in the US. With this increasing population growth comes increasing food insecurity. Then came COVID. This slide provides some factoids from the food bank. The food bank is headquartered in Boise, and as you can see in the map, there are satellite warehouse facilities in Lewiston and Pocatello, and from those satellite facilities, the Idaho Food Bank has partnerships with other nonprofit and other organizations to provide food to hungry neighbors throughout the state. We're going to talk about a partnership we've had with the food bank, improving and expanding the flow of donated food to the needy people throughout the state. All this talk about fixing processes and working with the food bank to help them fix their processes first begs the question, so what's a process? Here's our definition. I'll give you a moment to read it. These processes in many organizations are often undefined or siloed. Now, there are some qualifications here. In manufacturing organizations, often because of Kaizen and other quality improvement efforts and quality assurance efforts, they may really know what their processes are. But if you're working in more service-related organizations, they may not necessarily know what their processes are, or their processes may have been something that just evolved organically, but was never something that people actually engineered or thought through. And in a variety of places, not just the small to the mid-sized nonprofits we work with, but into other places as well, organizational processes are often things that arose over time. They're often undefined, and they're often siloed. What do I mean by that? Well, let's look at food distribution at a food bank and how there are different departments. There's purchasing, procurement, operations, distributions. And in each one of those departments, there's a department chair, and there are subordinates or minions or teammates that work inside of that silo. And so the purchasing silo works on purchasing, the operations silo works on operations, the distribution silo works on distribution. And if the distribution folks find a problem and they feel that the source of the problem arises in purchasing, what has to happen is the folks actually doing the work in distribution raise the issue up to the distribution manager at the top of the silo, And then the distribution manager kind of crosses the other silos and gets to the purchasing manager, and they kind of have a talk. And then the purchasing manager goes to all of his or her folks, and they have a talk, and then the response goes up to the purchasing manager. They walk it across the silos again, and it gets back to distribution. This siloing effect is relatively inefficient, and it comes in any organization that's big enough where the organization needs to compartmentalize the work that people do. Whoops. And it hides the fact that in the food bank, there's a food flow process that actually begins with purchasing and flows across all of those silos and finally provides food for neighbors. And it's the handoffs from one silo to another that can often be the place where messy people and performance problems happen, and often places that are causing clients pain points and forming the basis of their request for us to give them help, whether they call it training or something else. Anyone who's been in the field for a few years has heard the broad variety of alphabet soup associated with process change and innovation. At a large scale level, there's business process automation that changes whole systems across, but leaves processes in place. So the idea is computers can automate things and let computers automate things that people are good at so people don't have to do them. And that's at a smaller scale. At a much larger scale is business process reengineering, which often creates radical changes to business processes. It's about large scale efficiency and effectiveness, usually across whole enterprises. Our work at the Process Management Lab operates at a middle level, which is called process improvement, where we're looking to medium scale changes to existing business processes. And we're looking at increasing the efficiency and the effectiveness of those processes, re-engineering them in a way that makes them more straightforward. We offer a broad variety of services to our clients, including planning, the redesign or the process improvement angle, but also it's relatively straightforward to redesign a process, but unless you're helping people implement the solutions in the redesign process and you're helping them support or manage the organizational change that those processes bring, then odds are the change or the innovation or the solutions aren't going to have the desired effects. So we offer this broad range of services. The gist of our process management efforts focus on the part about planning and the part about the workshops. So first, we begin by holding a 1-hour planning meeting with the client and other key stakeholders. In that meeting, we'll select a process. We'll talk about the goals for improving that process. Often those goals will lead to a question that's the focus of our workshops. We'll work together to craft a high-level process map. I'll show you one of those in a minute. We work together to specify who the participants should be and to make sure that we're including everyone who has a hand in completing the process. And we'll also talk to clients and sometimes their bosses about the sponsorship of this effort and their responsibilities in implementing the solutions and managing the change associated with the solutions after the workshops are over. We'll also talk about their sponsorship responsibilities to ensure that participants have the release time to participate in the workshops. After the planning meeting, we'll hold our first workshop, which we call the As-Is workshop. Its purpose is to map or represent or flowchart the process the way people do it now. In addition, we'll specify stakeholder criteria. So who are the upstream stakeholders? Who are the downstream stakeholders? What does success look like for them? We'll also specify, as we map things out, who is responsible for each activity and any systems that they may use. After we've mapped out the process, we'll talk and we'll ask participants to identify disconnects or pain points. These disconnects or pain points are really important because these are the places where people are feeling frustration, and these are often the places where the process is broken. After that workshop, we'll distribute a report summarizing the workshop and asking people to review it and note any changes they want to make. And they'll bring those changes to the subsequent to-be workshop, which normally occurs about a week to 2 weeks after the as-is workshop. In that workshop, we'll review the process map and make any revisions we need that came out of revisions to the report. But we'll spend most of our time with participants brainstorming solutions for the disconnects and the pain points, and then prioritizing them. And then we spend time specifying implementation steps for the prioritized solutions. And that gets wrapped up into a to-be report. These workshops are about 5 hours long each. So you can see why we're talking to the client about sponsorship in that planning meeting, because it's important for the people who are expediting that process to be available for those full 10 hours across the 2 workshops to be able to participate, so that what comes out of the workshop reflects the shared smarts of everyone, so that we are maximizing the chances of buy-in afterwards. So what might one of those high-level process maps look like? You can take almost any process and look at it, say, at a 30,000-foot level, and identify and organize and represent the process in, somewhere between, maybe 6 to 9 steps or phases. The process has some sort of formal start where something triggers it, and it has some sort of formal end where everyone knows the process is over. This example comes from the Idaho Food Bank, and this is the process that they use to repack food. So the food has already been purchased or acquired. It's been donated to the food bank. It's come into the warehouse. It's been stored, and now it needs to go from storage into an area where they repack it into smaller quantities for distribution to neighbors throughout the state. So participants in this workshop identified 6 main phases or main activities. They need to plan that repacking. They need to prepare for the volunteers who will do the repacking. They'll need to train those volunteers. They'll need to actually repack the product itself. Once the product has been repacked, they're going to put it on pallets, and then, they're going to put it on pallets. And then they're going to wrap those pallets so that they can be transported. And at the end, they have to clean and sanitize, because after all, they're dealing with food, and food safety is an issue. And so that's the high-level process map. And then later, or throughout the rest of the workshop, they're going to spend some time detailing each one of these phases, each one of these activities. For example, they're going to spend some time detailing what happens during the repack of the product. And that begins by working with participants to build detailed maps for each of those activities. So this is what repack the product looks like. They conduct it, they supervise it, they record changes in a form, and they do all these things simultaneously. And then they complete those bins and it's wrapped up and it goes to the next step, which is step number 5. And so after laying out the high-level map and all these detailed maps, the rest of the time is going to be spent going through each of these maps and asking people to specify disconnects. Those disconnects are places where the process is broke, or people don't get what they expected, or things where people think, why am I doing this when there's an easier way to do this? Or people are saying, wow, this is always error-ridden when it happens. Essentially, a disconnect in this situation represents a frustration, and the frustration arises from some part of the process that's broken. And so we ask people to brainstorm those disconnects, and they do that by adding them and associating them with specific steps in the level 2 map. So here there are 4 different disconnects associated with conducting repacking. We ask people to characterize the urgency of the disconnect. How much of a pain is it? Is it a high urgency pain, medium, or low? And you can see here that there are 2 high urgency pains that afflict the folks who do this repack, and 1 medium one. And again, we'll go through all of those pain points, and for each one, people will brainstorm it, and then we'll rank its urgency. By the time we get through all the level 1 map, all the level 2 maps, and then all of the disconnects, we're pretty much at the end of the as-is workshop. In the subsequent 2B workshop, what happens is we go back and first we review the maps and make any changes that people feel need to be represented in the maps. Again, these maps are models. They are as there's a quip that all models, all flowcharts are actually wrong. It's just that some are more useful than others. And sometimes our participants think about what we're representing and they want to make some revisions to it. So you can see here that they added an additional set of steps, and they've also created solutions for the higher rated disconnects. The solutions are in green. So for a large part of this 2B workshop, we'll go through all of those solutions and have participants brainstorming these by adding them to the maps. After they add all the solutions, we'll ask participants to prioritize those by voting. And after they voted on the most high-level solutions, the most promising solutions, we'll work with participants to specify the initial implementation steps for each. We've worked with the Idaho Food Bank almost 2 years and ended up designing ourselves out of a job after we had addressed pretty much all of the food flow. Working with them, they noted that this effort provided some impact. First, it reduced the cost of food spoilage from $93,000 a month to $250 a month as of last fall when these figures were generated. These efforts also decreased receiving errors by 30%, which is really important because if you decrease receiving errors, you decrease other errors that arise or ripple throughout the rest of the food flow process. They also noticed some other improvements that were more qualitative. They had documentation and standard operating procedures that they didn't have before. They now had conceptual tools that their process owners and process teams were using in conjunction with their chief operating officer to continuously improve their processes and move to the point where they were specifying, benchmarking, and looking at places for automation because the processes had been fixed. This effort provided a common language to talk about process, and it also provided a culture shift where people on the warehouse floor became increasingly comfortable working with the food bank leadership. Now, leadership worked in offices that had carpet, and the warehouse personnel worked on a concrete floor. And what our clients told us is how this process management effort bridged the chasm between the warehouse concrete and the manager carpet. With that, I'm going to hand this over to Fran to talk about universal promises of leadership and some of the lessons we've learned. Fran?
This one is maybe one of my favorite slides here, and it fits very nicely after Steve's description of, and I couldn't believe this the first time I heard it, but in 3 companies that I worked in, we were the carpet people. And it really is that split between management and workers. And these promises of leadership, I think, are the principles that finally start to take you from being managers to leaders. They have to feel like their work is meaningful. All of the stakeholders. And when we say all of the stakeholders, we don't mean all of the managers of the people that do the process. We mean the stakeholders, the people that are actually out there packing boxes every day. And we have to have processes that they can execute, that they feel like they understand what they're supposed to do and they know how to do it. Next slide, Steve. So again, invite all the stakeholders. Invite the upstream. Yeah, the management, the carpet people need to be there. The people that are managing the work and that know what they're expecting all of the resources to be used for. And think about your internal and your external customers. So in the case of the food bank, you know, the people that are going to receive those boxes of food ultimately, how are they going to deal with the food they're going to get, or the distribution points between the food bank and the end recipient of the boxes of food. Next slide. So designing the effective facilitation, this is an interesting one. This is one that living my entire career in an IT department, believe it or not, this is probably where I learned more about flexibility and facilitation than any other job I can imagine. Because everybody that walks into a meeting where there's an IT geek in the room, they expect some issues. So it's the flexibility. Expectations have to be clear. It has to be visual. They have to understand it. You have to be flexible because you're going to have the warehouse manager that comes in that's been doing this warehouse job his entire life, and he knows everything about every piece of it and no one can tell him anything. You have to work with him because he does have a lot of good information, but you have to figure out how to get that information from his brain out on the table so everyone can see and take the good pieces of it and leave the ones that aren't so worthwhile. Next slide, Steve. Fix the broken processes first. Broken processes frequently really are barriers to the performance of that team. The standards have to be clear, not complicated, not overwhelming, not so much paperwork that they can't get through it, but it has to be clear what's expected. They need to have standard procedures, cheat sheets, coaching, and this includes the management team as well as the line workers. One of the things that I've discovered over time, it's really easy to write standard operating procedures that the management folks create. They think they understand it. You hand it to the person on the assembly line and it makes no sense. It doesn't flow. It doesn't work. And then the carpet people are upset because it's not working as they designed it. So those are some things you have to watch for. Timely, relevant, useful feedback. This one is really easy to slide over the top. Maybe it's a pat on the back. Great job today, guys. You killed it. Maybe it's a whiteboard on the wall that shows yesterday I produced 5 widgets. Today I was able to do 6. So it's a lot about knowing the teams, knowing the culture, and understanding what it is that those teams need to be able to see on a daily basis. Useful and user-friendly tools. One of the places that I worked, we actually changed all of the assembly instructions on the production line from paper to electronic displays. That was a huge change for folks that had never, in many cases, had never used a computer. And believe it or not, it wasn't that many years ago. It was less than 10 years ago. The assembly line folks didn't know how to use a mouse and a keyboard, but they were able to adapt to having all of their instructions displayed on a computer screen in front of their workstation. Made a huge difference in their ability to perform their jobs, and they felt like they were learning. They felt more valuable. So sometimes you have to kind of reach outside the norm for what really feels like rewards for doing a good job. Next slide. Training. And as I understand it, everybody on this call has a stake in that game. You need to provide the structured training, absolutely. Then you have to pay attention to how are people going to apply what they've learned on the job, and make sure that the training you provide isn't something that they might start doing next year and then expect it to be effective when they walk out back to their desk or back to their assembly line. Make sure that they understand how those learnings apply to the job. It always makes me think of my kids when they had to take math classes in school and they would come home and say, I'm never going to use that anywhere. It happens, and now most of them kind of use math. Remove the barriers. Make sure that there isn't anything in the way of them doing their job the way you want it done. Observe, coach, provide feedback, reinforce. These are the standard parts of managing any team. Next slide. Back to you, Steve.
Thank you. This is what we had planned to talk about. I think it's important that we're going, as L&D folks, we're going to get requests for clients. Some of those requests could be very well-meaning but ill-informed. And it's important that when we receive those requests, we start looking at what's the real performance issue and how do we support that performance. One of the things that we found is quite often client problems feature broken processes as well. And so if you suspect that the problem that the client is requesting training for might be arising for reasons other than people just don't know how, or they just don't want to. Sometimes process improvement can be an interesting approach to take, because it will look at surfacing a variety of performance issues. Some of those solutions are going to be training, and when training is the solution, you have a venue to talk about all the other things that need to be in place to ensure that that training actually makes its way back on the job in ways that improve performance. Sometimes those solutions are other things. One of the solutions that came out of our work with the food bank in repack was a whiteboard, and it was a big one, and they used it to track the current status of all of the incoming food and the repacks that they had to do, and then the distribution sites. And they could update that real time by hand, and everybody in the warehouse could see where those changes were and could flex. Other changes were just simple changes in standards, and within 3 minutes of being brought up at a meeting, this problem was resolved. So these process improvement efforts are set up in ways that can not only provide a number of training solutions and support for that training, but also identify other things that are getting in the way and address them all at once in a more systematic and systemic fashion. We hope you found our work useful, and if not useful, maybe interesting.
One thing
Thank
I
you
want
very
to add,
much.
one thing I want to add, Steve, before we drop off, going back to choosing our stakeholders and our talk that we had about carpet people. One of the things, most critical, valuable things that happened is opening the line of communications between the upper management folks and the line workers. It helped them be comfortable talking about issues that they encountered. I think we're back to you, Chris.
Great. Well, thanks for that presentation. Very informative, and appreciate seeing your processes. I'm going to open it up to questions. Steve, I was going to just leave it here if you wanted to, anybody has questions on any of the slides, or you needed to go back, you can share that again. But any questions anybody has, feel free to come off mute. If someone's talking, go ahead and raise your hand or put it in the chat.
Hey, Chris, it's Rose Nicholson.
Hey, Rose.
Thank you guys for doing this. This was quite informative. Hello, Dr. V. It's been a long time. I was a student of yours many years ago. Couple of things. One, a comment and then a question. So the comment about the metrics, thank you guys for putting metrics into the presentation. I think in learning and development, we don't always do a good job of talking about how our programs impact the actual client as far as metrics are concerned. So it was really good to see spoilage as a metric and errors as a metric, which really align to the business goals of what the client is trying to achieve. I think that is absolutely superb. I know that I am trying to increase the number of metrics that I show when working with the client. So thank you again for doing that. Second thing is a question. So as part of your process, I saw that you were prioritizing solutions. So you're offering solutions to the client and then you're prioritizing them. Have you run into situations where you are talking about a solution or prioritizing a solution and there's a budgetary or a resource restraint on the client side where they just can't do that? You know, how do you handle that, and how did that process look for you? Over.
Fran, can I start on this, and you can
Yep.
add if you want? Interesting, at the food bank, one thing that happened is that the people on the warehouse floor who own the processes weren't really comfortable at first chatting to the people, the managers, who are sitting, in chairs on the carpets. And so one of the things that we work with them in support of, what happens after the workshops was to work with them in a way where we help them summarize the top solutions they had and help them articulate the rationales for those solutions. And then they took them to leadership, where leadership could say, we can support that fully, or can we do this differently? And so essentially we help them start internal negotiations about what's happening with those solutions. And that turned into ongoing meetings that every process lead has with the food bank leadership team, saying, here's the status of the solutions we're working on, any difficulties we're experiencing, and things that we need from you. And so I think it's only natural for somebody to say we want a solution, and it may be too much, it may be out of budget. But I think what's more important is that you provide a venue where those conversations can happen on an ongoing basis. And everyone understands that we all have a role to play and we can work this problem together. And so I think the more important aspect to that question, Rose, is putting together some sort of institutionalized process, something in the work culture where there's this ongoing communication about here's where we are, here's what we're experiencing, what we need, and that dialogue that comes with those kinds of discussions. Fran?
We also spent a little bit of time during those prioritizing solutions, talking about the value that solution would return. So in some cases, on the surface, all of them looked like they were highly needed, but in some instances, even though you really needed to do it, some of them had very little return and some had a high return. So it did help when they had those two metrics to look at. So a high need, high return could be prioritized above the other. We worked with the Boise Downtown Association. That was interesting because it was such a small organization, but they learned that they had some give and take that they hadn't thought of before on how they could partially solve some problems without blowing their budget. So it's more about teaching them to communicate and to negotiate with each other. It's not an all or nothing. You don't have to do the whole solution or nothing at all. And it helped them have those conversations.
That makes total sense. Thank you. I love the integrated solution approach. And I really think I'm going to kind of talk to some of my folks as well about that negotiation piece. I think that is extremely valuable to people, and it also makes people feel a part of the solution. So I think if we can work together to come up with a solution, then of course you get better buy-in than if you are forcing a solution down their throat. So really good information. Thank you guys so much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Chris, are there other questions?
Any other questions, folks? Okay, if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to open up some polls in chat. If you can go ahead and just provide some input, and those will be on our Teams channel site there. And I want to thank the presenters for presenting this information and your generosity and dedicating your time, and also for everybody that attended. Taking an hour out of your time is really admirable and appreciate it. And feel free to network and contact Steve and any of the members if you want. We will go ahead and put out the recording, and I'll post that on Yammer and See everyone next time. I'm going to go ahead and open these up. And is everybody able to see three polls? I'm not sure what it's like on.
Chris, I see 3 polls in the chat window.
Yep.
Okay, great. And if
I'm
anybody
going to
else
rate
has
this presentation as, no, I guess I don't get
Steve. Can't take you out in public.
If anybody else has any other questions before you drop, just feel free to go ahead and ask them.
I also added my email address into the chat window. And if you have any questions or if something comes up, please feel free to contact us or look at our Process Management Lab website. Chris, thank you for this opportunity. It's been fun to talk shop with the folks at Booz Allen Hamilton.
Sure, we appreciate your time, and thanks again, everybody, for joining.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adriana.